The first shot echoed across the dusty plains like thunder, sending flocks of startled birds into the crimson sky as June Michaels crouched low behind the weathered fence post. Sweat trickled down her temple, mingling with the dirt smudged across her freckled face as she watched flames devour the only home she'd ever known. The raiders had come at dusk, their hoofbeats matching the frantic rhythm of her heart as they descended upon her family's modest ranch just outside Willow Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878. June's fingers trembled as she clutched the small leather pouch containing her mother's wedding ring and the last letter from her father before he'd been killed in a mining accident 3 months prior. At 22, she was alone in the world, her mother having succumbed to fever last winter. The ranch was supposed to be her fresh start, her chance to prove that a woman could make her own way. Now it was nothing but ash and memory. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by raucous laughter that sent chills down her spine. June knew what happened to women caught by raiders. Gathering her skirts, she fled toward the creek bed, her boots slipping on loose stones as she scrambled down the embankment. The water glinted silver in the fading light, offering momentary cover as she splashed through the shallow current. The distant howl of a coyote only added to her terror as darkness fell. June had nowhere to go but forward, her lungs burning as she pushed herself harder, farther from the destruction behind her. She'd heard rumors of a neighboring ranch a few miles west, owned by a reclusive cowboy who kept to himself. It was her only hope. When the silhouette of a barn finally appeared against the star-scattered sky, June nearly wept with relief. Her legs gave way as she reached the weathered structure, and she crawled the final few yards to its shelter. The massive door creaked as she pushed it open just enough to slip inside, the scent of hay and horses enveloping her like a familiar embrace. "Please," she whispered to no one, collapsing onto a pile of hay. "Please let me be safe." The sound of approaching horses made her blood run cold. Voices carried on the night air rough, angry voices that belonged to the men who had destroyed her home. June scrambled deeper into the barn, frantically searching for a hiding place as boot steps crunched outside. "Check the barn," a gruff voice commanded. "Could have sworn I saw someone heading this way." Panic clawed at June's throat as she spotted a ladder leading to the hayloft. With no time to think, she climbed as quickly and quietly as possible, diving into the sweet-smelling hay just as the barn door was thrown open. Pressing herself flat against the rough wooden planks, she held her breath, certain the thundering of her heart would give her away. Light from a lantern swept across the barn below as the raiders searched every corner. June's fingers dug into the hay, her prayers a desperate litany in her mind. If they found her. The sudden sharp click of a rifle being cocked cut through the tense silence. "I believe you boys are trespassing," came a deep voice, steady as stone. "And I don't take kindly to uninvited guests." June peered through a crack between the boards to see a tall figure standing in the doorway, rifle aimed with unwavering precision. Even in the dim light, she could make out the broad shoulders and steady stance of a man accustomed to handling himself in dangerous situations. "Whoa there, mister," one of the raiders said, his tone shifting from menacing to placating in an instant. "We're just looking for a woman who stole from us, ran this way." "No woman here," the stranger replied, his voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to fill the barn. "Just me and my property, which you're currently standing on without permission." "Look, we don't want no trouble, then you shouldn't have brought it to my door." The cowboy took a step forward. "Now you've got until I count to 3 to get back on your horses and ride out. 1. "There's 4 of us and 1 of you," another raider challenged, though June noticed he'd already taken a step toward the door. 2. The The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. June held her breath, certain that blood would be spilled at any moment. "Forget it," the first raider muttered. "She ain't worth getting shot over." With reluctant curses, the men retreated. The cowboy remained motionless until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did he lower his rifle. "They're gone," he called out, his voice now directed upward toward the hayloft. "You can come down now." June froze. How had he known she was there? "I don't mean to rush you, miss, but those men might decide to bring back friends. Best we get inside the house where it's safer." Seeing no alternative, June slowly descended the ladder, hay clinging to her torn dress and tangled hair. When her feet touched the ground, she finally got a good look at her rescuer in the lantern light. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with eyes the color of a summer storm and dark hair that curled slightly against his collar. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the shadow of a beard that looked to be a few days old. Despite his rough appearance, there was something in his gaze that put her at ease, a steadiness, a reliability that June desperately needed. "Zachary Zimmerman." He introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Most folks call me Zach." "June Michaels," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They burned my ranch, killed my hands." The reality of what had happened crashed over her anew, and June swayed on her feet. In one fluid motion, Zach moved forward and caught her elbow, steadying her without presuming too much familiarity. "Easy now. You're safe here." "They'll come back," June said, panic rising in her voice. "Once they realize I wasn't headed for town, let them come," Zach interrupted, a hard edge to his voice. "But first, let's get you somewhere safer than this barn." He guided her toward the door, rifle still in hand as he scanned the darkness beyond. "My house isn't much, but it's sturdy. Built it myself." The walk to the small ranch house seemed to take forever, every shadow a potential threat. June was acutely aware of Zach's presence beside her, solid and reassuring. When they finally reached the porch, he ushered her inside before securing the door behind them. The interior was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's home, with simple but well-made furniture. A fire burned low in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over the main room. "Sit," Zach instructed, nodding toward a chair by the fire. "I'll make some coffee." "You look like you could use something warm." June sank gratefully into the chair, the events of the day catching up to her in a wave of exhaustion. "Thank you," she murmured. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "No need to think on that," Zach interrupted as he busied himself at the stove. "What matters is you're safe now." As he worked, June studied him. There was efficiency in his movements, nothing wasted or showy. His clothes were well worn but clean, his boots scuffed from years of work. This was a man who lived by his own hands, who understood the harshness of the territory. "Were you alone at your ranch?" he asked, breaking the silence. June nodded, accepting the steaming cup he offered. "My father died 3 months ago. Mining accident over in Silver Gulch. My mother passed last winter." She took a sip of the coffee, grateful for its warmth. "I was trying to keep the place going." Something flashed in Zach's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or shared grief. "It's hard country for anyone to make it alone." "I was managing," June said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "Until tonight." Zach settled into a chair across from her, his rifle propped within easy reach. "Those men, you know them?" June shook her head. "Never seen them before. They just appeared, started shooting. Said the land was theirs now." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "Everything I owned was in that house." "Not everything," Zach said quietly. When June looked at him questioningly, he nodded toward her hand. "You saved something." June glanced down at the small leather pouch still clutched in her left hand, knuckles white from her grip. My mother's ring, and my father's last letter. Her voice caught. Silly things to risk my life for, I suppose. Not silly at all, Zach replied, his voice gentle. Some things matter more than others. They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire and the distant howl of coyotes the only sounds. June felt her eyelids growing heavy, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally ebbing away. You should rest, Zach said, noticing her fatigue. You can take the bed. I'll keep watch out here. June started to protest, but Zach held up a hand. I insist. Been sleeping rough since I was 16 one night and a chair won't trouble me none. Too exhausted to argue, June allowed herself to be led to a small bedroom off the main room. The bed was neatly made, the quilt worn but clean. I'll be right outside if you need anything, Zach assured her. Try to get some sleep, Miss Michaels. Morning will come soon enough, and with it decisions to make. As he turned to leave, June caught his arm. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Zach's expression was unreadable in the shadows. Out here, people have to look out for each other. Otherwise, none of us would survive. He gently removed her hand from his arm. Rest now. As the door closed behind him, June sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Her home was gone, her future uncertain, and she was dependent on the kindness of a stranger. Yet despite everything, she felt safer than she had in months. Outside the bedroom, Zach settled into his chair, rifle across his lap as he stared into the dying fire. He hadn't told June the whole truth about why he'd helped her. He hadn't mentioned that he'd been watching her ranch for weeks, admiring from a distance the determination with which she'd faced each day after her father's death. He hadn't admitted that he'd recognized her the moment she stepped into his barn, despite the dirt and fear marring her features. Some truths were better left for morning light. June woke with a start, sunlight streaming through the window beside the bed. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-muddled mind. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back: the raiders, the fire, the desperate flight to safety. Zach, the cowboy who had saved her life. June sat up, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. Her dress was rumpled and stained, her hair a tangled mess. She ran her fingers through it, attempting to bring some order to the auburn waves, then gave up with a sigh. There were more important matters to worry about than her appearance. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her from the bedroom. She found Zach at the stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. He'd changed his shirt, she noticed, and his hair was damp, as if he'd recently washed. "Good morning," she said softly. Zach turned, a brief smile crossing his face before his expression returned to its usual reserved state. "Morning, thought you might be hungry." "Starving," June admitted, suddenly aware that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. "Can I help with anything?" Zach shook his head. "Already done. Sit." June obeyed, settling at the small table where 2 plates were waiting. Zach brought over a pot of coffee and a skillet of bacon and eggs, serving her before taking his own seat. "Thank you," June said, meaning for more than just the breakfast. "For everything." Zach nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Rode out at first light to check your place," he said, changing the subject. "Not much left standing. They were thorough." June's appetite threatened to desert her, but she forced herself to take a bite of the perfectly cooked eggs. "Did you see? Bodies, 2 men. Your ranch hands, I'm guessing." "I buried them proper." Zach met her gaze across the table. "I'm sorry." Grief washed over her anew. Matt and Eddie had been good men, loyal to her father and kind to her. They'd stayed on even when June could barely afford to pay them, believing in her ability to save the ranch. Now they were dead because of it. "It's my fault," she whispered, setting down her fork. I should have sold the ranch after Father died. Everyone said I couldn't make it work. And what would you have done instead? Zach asked, his voice matter of fact rather than judgmental. Married the first man who offered. Become a schoolmarm in some dusty town. Worked in a boarding house. June flinched at his bluntness. I don't know, something. You were fighting for your home, Zach said. There's no shame in that. He took a sip of his coffee. Do you know why those men came? Your land valuable for some reason. June frowned, considering the question. There were rumors about the railroad planning a new route through the valley. Father mentioned it in his letter, said it could be a blessing or a curse depending on where exactly the tracks went. She looked up, understanding dawning. If they went through our property, it would be worth a lot more than a struggling cattle ranch, Zach finished. Might explain why strangers showed up claiming it was theirs. But I have the deed, June said. It's legal and proper. Father bought that land fair and square 15 years ago. Zach's expression darkened. Deeds don't mean much to men with guns and greed, Miss Michaels. June, she corrected him. After saving my life, I think you've earned the right to use my given name. A hint of a smile touched his lips. June, then. They finished breakfast in companionable silence. June insisted on washing the dishes, needing to feel useful after all Zach had done for her. As she worked, she was acutely aware of his presence behind her, sorting through what appeared to be ammunition at the table. I need to go to town, she said finally, turning to face him. Report what happened to the sheriff. See if there's any work to be had. The reality of her situation was sinking and she was homeless, nearly penniless, with nothing but the clothes on her back. Sheriff Daniels is a good man, but he's got no deputies and too much territory to cover, Zach said. As for work, he hesitated. Town's 5 hours ride. We should wait a day, make sure those raiders have truly moved on. June bristled slightly at the we. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Zimmerman, but I can't impose on you any longer. You've done more than enough. Zach, he corrected, echoing her earlier words, and it's not an imposition. He stood, crossing to where his hat hung by the door. I need to check on the herd. You're welcome to come along, get some fresh air. June hesitated. The idea of staying alone in the house, jumping at every sound, wasn't appealing, and there was something about Zach's quiet strength that made her feel safe. I'd like that, she decided, though I'm not exactly dressed for riding. Zach's eyes traveled briefly over her torn dress before he turned toward a trunk in the corner. My sister left some things last time she visited. Might not be a perfect fit, but they'll be better than what you're wearing. He pulled out a simple skirt and blouse, along with a worn pair of boots. She won't mind. Your sister visits often, June asked, accepting the clothes with murmured thanks. A shadow crossed Zach's face. Not anymore. Rachel married a banker in Santa Fe 2 years ago, visits at Christmas, sends letters when she remembers. He headed for the door. I'll saddle the horses. Take your time. Alone, June changed quickly, grateful to be out of her ruined dress. The clothes were a bit loose. Zach's sister must have been taller and fuller figured, but clean and whole. She used a bit of water from the basin to wash her face and hands, then tried to bring some order to her hair, finally giving up and braiding it simply down her back. Outside, she found Zach waiting with 2 horses, a sturdy buckskin gelding, and a dappled mare with intelligent eyes. This is Penny, Zach said, nodding to the mare. Gentlest horse I own, but she's got spirit when it counts. June approached the mare, allowing her to sniff her hand before stroking her velvet nose. She's beautiful. She seems to like you, Zach observed, something soft in his expression that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He offered a hand to help June mount, his touch firm but gentle as he steadied her in the saddle. They rode in silence across the rolling grassland, the morning sun warming their backs. June found herself studying her companion, trying to understand the contradictions that made up Zachary Zimmerman. He was clearly competent, self-sufficient, yet there was a loneliness about him that resonated with her own. His ranch was well-maintained but minimal, no decorative touches, nothing that wasn't strictly necessary. It was the home of a man who had survived, not one who had lived. "How long have you been out here?" she asked finally. Zach glanced over at her. "Bought this place 8 years ago, right after I got out of the army. Was with the cavalry before that." "The Indian Wars?" June asked tentatively. A muscle tightened in Zach's jaw. "Some. Didn't care for it much. Saw things I wish I hadn't." He nudged his horse over a shallow gully. "Decided I'd rather live on my own terms. Alone." The word slipped out before June could stop it. "Seems that way," Zach replied evenly. They crested a small rise and June gasped at the view that opened before them. A herd of perhaps 30 cattle grazed peacefully in a verdant valley, the morning sun casting long shadows across the grass. Beyond them, mountains rose blue and distant against the sky. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's home," Zach said simply, but there was pride in his voice. "Not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine, free and clear." As they rode closer to the herd, June noticed something odd. "Are those sheep mixed in with your cattle?" A rare smile touched Zach's lips. "Good eye. Yes, I keep a small flock. Most ranchers around here wouldn't be caught dead with sheep, but they're practical. Less trouble than cattle in some ways, and the wool brings in extra money." "My father always said diversifying was smart," June said, remembering her father's attempts to grow crops alongside raising cattle. "He just never had much luck with it. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," June said softly. "Taught me everything I know about ranching. Everyone said it was a waste, teaching a girl such things, but he insisted I learn." Zach looked at her appraisingly. "Seems to me he was right to teach you. Knowledge is never wasted." They spent the morning checking the herd, Zach explaining his system as they rode. June was impressed by his efficiency and the obvious care he took with his animals. It was clear he'd put thought into every aspect of his operation, from the placement of water sources to the rotation of grazing areas. By midday, they'd return to the barn to care for the horses. June worked alongside Zach, falling easily into the familiar rhythms of ranch life. There was comfort in the physical work, in focusing on tasks she understood rather than the uncertainty of her future. As they walked back toward the house, the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Zach's hand went to the pistol at his hip, his body instinctively shifting to place himself between June and potential danger. "Get to the house," he instructed, his voice low and urgent. "Rifles by the door." "I'm not leaving you out here alone," June protested, though fear made her voice quaver. Before Zach could argue, 4 riders appeared around the bend in the road. June's heart hammered in her chest as she recognized the men who had destroyed her home. "Well, well," the leader called, a cruel smile spreading across his weathered face. "Look what we found, boys." "The little lady who got away." Zach's hand remained steady on his pistol. "You're trespassing on private property," he said, his voice calm despite the tension evident in his stance. "Turn around and ride out and we'll forget this happened." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that made June's skin crawl. "That's mighty generous of you, mister, but we've got unfinished business with the lady." "Your business is with me now," Zach replied evenly, "and I'm telling you to leave." The 4 men exchanged glances, clearly assessing the situation. Though they outnumbered Zach, something in his demeanor gave them pause. "Look here," the leader said, adopting a more reasonable tone. "We represent some business interests in the territory. All we want is to buy the lady's property." "Fair and square." My property is not for sale. June stepped forward, anger overcoming her fear. Especially not to men who murder innocent people and burn down homes. Now, that's a serious accusation, miss, the man said, his eyes hardening. Could be dangerous, making claims like that without proof. I know what I saw, June retorted, and Sheriff Daniels will hear all about it when I ride into town tomorrow. A tense silence followed her words. June could feel Zach's displeasure at her provocation, but she stood her ground, chin lifted defiantly. Seems to me, Zach said finally, that you boys have worn out your welcome, twice now. I won't be so polite if there's a third time. The leader's hand drifted toward his holster. You threatening us, Cowboy? Just stating facts, Zach replied. 4 against 1 isn't great odds, I'll grant you, but I guarantee at least 2 of you won't ride away if you draw. Something in his voice, the absolute certainty, caused the men to hesitate. Boss, one of the other riders murmured. Maybe we should shut up, the leader snapped, his eyes never leaving Zach. For a long moment the tableau held, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Finally, the leader spat on the ground. This ain't over, he growled, wheeling his horse around. Not by a long shot. The 4 riders departed, dust rising in their wake. June released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her knees suddenly weak with relief. Zach turned to her, his expression thunderous. What were you thinking, provoking them like that? I was thinking they needed to know I won't be intimidated, June shot back, though her voice trembled slightly. They took everything from me. I won't let them take my dignity too. For a moment, Zach looked as if he might argue further. Then, unexpectedly, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You've got spirit, June Michaels, I'll give you that. Despite herself, June smiled back. My father always said I was too stubborn for my own good. He wasn't wrong, Zach sobered. But those men are dangerous, we need to be careful. June caught the "we" again, but didn't challenge it this time. If she was honest with herself, the idea of facing this alone terrified her. Do you think they'll come back? Eventually, Zach said grimly. Men like that don't take kindly to being refused. But they'll think twice now that they know you've got someone watching your back. The simple statement, you've got someone watching your back, warmed June more than it should have. She'd been alone for so long, fighting her battles single-handed. The idea of having an ally, especially one as capable as Zach, was both comforting and disconcerting. We should get inside, Zach said, his hand at the small of her back guiding her toward the house. I need to think about our next move. Our next move, June echoed, allowing herself to be led. Unless you've got a better plan than the one that involves you riding alone into town, straight past those men who just threatened you. June had no answer for that. The truth was, she had no plan at all. Her future, which had seemed so clear just days ago, was now a blank slate, terrifying in its emptiness. Inside, Zach moved with purpose, checking the rifle by the door and ensuring the windows were secure. June watched him, struck by the efficiency of his movements. This wasn't the first time he'd prepared for trouble. Why are you doing this? She asked suddenly. Helping me, risking yourself against those men. You don't even know me. Zach paused, his back to her. For a moment, June thought he might not answer. I know enough, he said finally, turning to face her. I know you stayed on that ranch after losing both parents, trying to make a go of it when most women would have given up. I know you ran when you had to, saved what mattered most to you, and found help instead of giving in to despair. He shrugged, as if embarrassed by his own assessment. Seems to me that's a person worth helping. June was struck speechless by his words. She'd been so focused on her failures, the ranch she couldn't save, the men who had died, that she hadn't considered her actions might appear different to an outsider's eyes. Thank you, she said softly. for seeing something in me worth saving." Something flickered in Zach's eyes, something that made June's heart beat a little faster. But he looked away quickly, returning to his task of securing the house. "We should eat," he said abruptly. "Then make plans for tomorrow. If those men are watching the road to town, we'll need another route." June nodded, accepting the change of subject. "I can cook if you'd like. It's the least I can do." Zach hesitated, then nodded. "Pantry's through there. Help yourself to whatever you find." As June busied herself with preparations for a simple stew, she found herself humming softly, a habit her mother had always teased her about. The familiar task was soothing, bringing a sense of normalcy to the most abnormal circumstances she'd ever experienced. Through the window, she could see Zach chopping wood with powerful, practiced strokes. The afternoon sun glinted off his dark hair, highlighting the strong line of his shoulders beneath his shirt. June found herself watching longer than necessary, something warm and unfamiliar stirring within her. She turned back to her cooking, cheeks flushed. This was no time for such thoughts. Her life was in shambles, her future uncertain. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for a man she barely knew, no matter how kind or capable he might be. Yet as she stirred the pot, June couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to belong here, in this simple house with its quiet, steadfast owner. To wake each morning to the sight of those mountains, to work alongside Zach as they built something together. Dangerous thoughts indeed. Evening fell softly over the ranch, the sunset painting the sky in vivid strokes of orange and pink. Zach and June sat on the porch after dinner, watching as stars began to appear in the deepening blue above. "My father used to say you could read the weather in the stars," June said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Clear and bright meant fair days ahead." "And what do they tell you tonight?" Zach asked, his voice quiet in the gathering darkness. June studied the sky. "That there's beauty even after loss," she replied. "That some things remain constant, no matter what changes below." Zach glanced at her, something like admiration in his expression. "You've got a way with words." June smiled, embarrassed. "My mother taught school before she married. She loved poetry, tried to teach me to see the world that way." Her smile faltered. "I wish she could see these stars. She would have loved it here." "What was she like, your mother?" Zach asked. The question surprised June. Most people avoided talking about the dead, uncomfortable with grief. But Zach seemed genuinely interested, his gaze steady on her face. "She was kind," June said slowly, memories washing over her, "and stronger than anyone knew. When father was away at the mines, she ran the ranch without complaint. Taught me to read and write, to cipher numbers, to see beauty in hard places." She twisted the simple gold band she wore on a chain around her neck. "She loved fiercely and completely." "You take after her," Zach observed. June looked at him, startled. "You can't know that." "I've seen enough to make a fair guess." Zach leaned back in his chair, eyes on the horizon. "A woman who faces down raiders to protect what's hers, who challenges armed men without flinching. That's fierce love for something, whether it's land or memory or principle." His perception unsettled her, seeing so clearly what June herself had never articulated. "And what about you?" she asked, deflecting the focus from herself. "What do you love fiercely enough to fight for?" The question hung in the air between them. Zach was silent for so long that June thought he might not answer. "Freedom," he said finally. "The right to live by my own rules on my own land, to answer to no one but myself." He glanced at her. "Selfish compared to your reasons." "Not selfish," June countered. "Honest. We all want freedom of some kind." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant sound, a gunshot, followed by the bellow of frightened cattle. Zach was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he ordered, striding toward the barn. "What is it?" June called after him, fear clutching at her throat. Zach paused, turning back to face her. Likely those men making good on their threat. They're trying to draw me out. His expression was grim in the fading light. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Before June could protest, he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. She hurried inside, securing the door as instructed. Her heart pounded as more shots rang out, followed by the sound of cattle in distress. It was a cruel tactic attacking a rancher's livelihood, his animals. June paced the small room, feeling helpless and trapped. The rifle Zach kept by the door tempted her. She knew how to shoot. Her father had taught her years ago. But would she be helping or hindering if she went out there? A crash at the back of the house made the decision for her. June snatched up the rifle, checking quickly that it was loaded before moving cautiously toward the sound. The kitchen window had been smashed, glass glittering on the floor in the moonlight. As she watched, a hand reached through the broken pane, fumbling for the latch. Without hesitation, June aimed the rifle. "I'll shoot if that hand moves another inch," she called out, pleased that her voice remained steady despite her fear. The hand froze, then slowly withdrew. "Now, miss," came a voice she recognized as one of the raiders. "No need for that." "We just want to talk. We have nothing to discuss," June replied. "Leave now or I start shooting." A low chuckle floated through the shattered window. "You're outnumbered, lady. Your cowboy friend is busy with my partners. It's just you and me now." June's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then it's a fair fight." The man laughed again, but there was uncertainty in it now. "You won't shoot. Women don't have the stomach for it." The rifle cracked as June fired, the bullet splintering the window frame inches from where the man's head had been. "Next one won't miss," she promised, her heart thundering in her ears. Cursing, the man retreated. June waited, listening intently for any sound of his return. Minutes ticked by, marked only by her ragged breathing and the distant commotion from the pasture. Then silence fell, sudden and complete. June remained where she was, rifle at the ready, straining to hear anything that might tell her what was happening. The waiting was unbearable, each moment stretching like hours as she imagined the worst. Finally, footsteps approached the front door. Heavy, purposeful steps that could belong to friend or foe. "June," Zach's voice strained but alive. "It's me. Open up." Relief flooded through her, but caution kept her wary. "How do I know it's really you?" A pause, then. "Your mother taught school, she loved poetry, and you hum when you cook." June lowered the rifle, hurrying to unbolt the door. Zach stumbled in, his shirt torn and a gash bleeding freely across his forehead. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, the rifle clattering to the floor. "You're hurt," she said, drawing back to examine the wound. Zach winced but allowed her inspection. "It's nothing, just a graze." His eyes fell on the broken window, then the rifle at their feet. "What happened here?" "One of them tried to get in the back window," June explained, guiding Zach to a chair. "I convinced him it was a poor idea." Despite his obvious pain, Zach's lips quirked upward. "Reminded him you're a good shot, did you?" "I may have demonstrated," June admitted, fetching a cloth and basin of water. "Hold still." As she tended to his wound, June was acutely aware of their proximity, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. Zach sat motionless under her ministrations, his eyes never leaving her face. "You could have been killed," she said softly, focusing on cleaning the cut to hide her emotion. "So could you," Zach countered. "Yet here we both are." "What happened out there?" Zach's expression darkened. "They scattered the herd, shot one of my best bulls. Cowards ran when I started shooting back." He caught June's hand as she finished bandaging his head. "This is my fight too now, June. Those men threatened what's mine." The possessive note in his voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "Your cattle, you mean?" That's part of it. Zach's gaze held hers, something unspoken passing between them. We need to leave at first light. Get to town, speak to the sheriff. Those men won't stop until they get what they want or someone stops them. June nodded, reluctantly pulling her hand from his. I'll be ready. They secured the house as best they could, Zach nailing boards over the broken window while June prepared supplies for their journey. The practical tasks helped calm her nerves, giving her something to focus on beyond the looming danger and her growing feelings for the man who had saved her life. As she spread blankets on the floor near the fire, insisting that Zach take the bed to recover from his injury, June found herself wondering what would happen after they reached town. Would she find work there? Move on to another territory? The future stretched before her, uncertain and daunting. And where would Zach fit into that future, if at all? She glanced at him as he checked the lock on the door one final time before retiring. In just 2 days, he had become essential to her in ways she couldn't fully understand. The thought of saying goodbye made her heart ache with a pain that rivaled even the loss of her home. We should try to sleep, Zach said, breaking into her thoughts. Tomorrow will come early. June nodded, settling onto her makeshift bed. Good night, Zach. He paused at the bedroom door, his expression hidden in shadow. Good night, June. Long after he had gone, June lay awake, listening to the night sounds and thinking of all that had changed in so short a time. Her life had been uprooted, her path altered irrevocably. Yet somehow, in the midst of loss and danger, she had found something unexpected, a connection, a possibility, a spark of something that might, given time and care, grow into something profound. With that thought warming her, June finally drifted to sleep. Dawn was just breaking when June woke to the sound of movement in the main room. She rose quickly, folding her blankets and smoothing her borrowed clothes as best she could. When she emerged from her corner, she found Zach already dressed and packing supplies into saddlebags. You're up early, she observed, moving to help him. Couldn't sleep, Zach admitted. His face looked drawn in the early light, the bandage on his forehead stark white against his tanned skin. Wanted to get an early start. June studied him with concern. How's your head? I've had worse. He handed her a bundle. Found these in Rachel's trunk. Thought you might want a change of clothes. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched June deeply. Thank you. They prepared in companionable silence, each anticipating the other's needs with surprising ease. By the time the sun had fully risen, they were mounted and ready to depart. Zach had chosen a route that would take them around the main road, following game trails through the hills to approach town from the north, a longer journey, but one less likely to result in an ambush. As they rode out, June glanced back at the small house that had provided safe harbor when she needed it most. Will your animals be all right while you're gone? They'll manage for a day or two, Zach replied. Cattle are scattered, but they know where the water is. They'll find their way back. The confidence in his voice reassured June. It was clear that despite his relatively short time as a rancher, Zach understood the rhythms of the land and the animals that inhabited it. They rode in silence for the first hour, alert for any sign of pursuit. The terrain grew more rugged as they entered the foothills, requiring all their attention to navigate safely. June was grateful for Penny's sure-footedness as the mare picked her way carefully along narrow trails. By mid-morning, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley below. June reined in her horse, taking in the spectacular view: rolling grasslands dotted with cattle, distant ranches marked by wisps of smoke, and beyond it all, the vast, untamed wilderness that made up the majority of the territory. It's magnificent, she breathed. Zach drew up beside her. Worth fighting for. Yes, June agreed, though she wasn't sure if they were speaking of the same thing. The land itself was beautiful, but it was the possibility of a future here, a future that might include the man beside her, that June found herself fighting for now. They continued their journey, stopping briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits. As they sat in the shade of a towering pine, June found herself studying Zach's profile, wondering about the path that had led him to this remote ranch. "You said you were in the cavalry," she ventured. "Is that how you learned to track and shoot so well?" Zach nodded, his expression growing distant. "The army taught me a lot of useful skills, and some I wish I could forget." "The Indian Wars," June guessed, remembering his earlier reticence on the subject. Zach was silent for a long moment. "I joined up young," he finally said. 16, though I told them I was 18, wanted adventure, to see the frontier, didn't understand what I was really signing up for." He looked away, his gaze on the distant mountains. "By the time I figured it out, I was in too deep." "What happened?" June asked softly. "We were ordered to clear a valley of Apache families, women, children, old folks, not warriors." Zach's voice grew taut with suppressed emotion. "I refused. Nearly got court-martialed for it. Instead, they sent me to a different unit, far from the fighting. Spent the rest of my enlistment guarding supply wagons." June reached out, covering his hand with hers. "You did the right thing." "Did I?" Zach looked down at their joined hands. "They cleared that valley anyway. All I did was save my own conscience." "Sometimes that's all we can do," June said. "Stand for what's right, even when it seems hopeless." Zach turned his hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. "Is that what you're doing now, standing for what's right?" "I'm trying," June admitted, "though I'm not entirely sure what that looks like yet." They remained that way for a moment, hands clasped between them, a connection forming that went beyond words. Then Zach gently withdrew, rising to his feet. "We should keep moving if we want to reach town by nightfall." The moment broken, June followed his lead, preparing to resume their journey. As she mounted Penny, she caught Zach watching her, something unreadable in his expression. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "Just thinking that you're stronger than you know, June Michaels." The simple statement warmed her more than it should have. They set off again, the trail narrowing as it wound through increasingly rocky terrain. June found herself grateful for Zach's steady presence ahead of her, guiding the way with confidence. As the afternoon waned, the path began to descend, indicating they were approaching the far side of the hills. Town couldn't be far now. June felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at the thought. Safety was close, but so was the moment when she would have to decide what came next in her uncertain future. The sound of a rifle shot shattered the peaceful stillness, echoing off the rocky slopes around them. Zach's horse reared in panic, nearly throwing its rider. June's heart leapt into her throat as she struggled to control Penny, who was prancing nervously. "Get down," Zach shouted, dismounting in one fluid motion and pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Into the trees." June obeyed instantly, abandoning Penny and running for the cover of a dense stand of pines. Another shot rang out, closer this time, sending bark splintering from a tree trunk inches from her head. Zach was beside her in an instant, pushing her deeper into the protective shadow of the trees. "Stay low," he instructed, his voice calm despite the danger. "They've been waiting for us." "How did they know we'd come this way?" June whispered, fear making her voice shake. "They didn't," Zach replied grimly. "They've probably got men watching all the approaches to town." He peered cautiously around the tree trunk. "I count 3 of them spread out along the ridge." June tried to steady her breathing, to think clearly through her terror. "What do we do?" "We need to reach those rocks." Zach nodded toward a jumble of boulders about 50 yards away. "Better cover there. I'll lay down suppressing fire, you run. Don't stop, don't look back, just get to those rocks. Understand, June nodded, gathering her courage. And then what? Then we figure out our next move, Zach said, checking his ammunition. Ready, ready. June tensed, prepared to run. Zach raised his rifle and began firing methodically at the ridge above them. The answering shots were wild, poorly aimed as the raiders scrambled for cover. June seized the moment, darting from behind the trees and sprinting toward the boulders as fast as her legs would carry her. The distance seemed to stretch endlessly before her, each step a lifetime as bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. Her lungs burned, her heart pounded, but fear drove her forward until she finally threw herself behind the sheltering rocks. She turned immediately, expecting to see Zach right behind her. He wasn't there. Horror flooded through June as she peered back toward the trees. Zach was down, clutching his leg, his face contorted in pain. Blood soaked through his trousers, bright and terrible in the late afternoon sun. Without thinking, June grabbed Zach's fallen rifle. She'd seen where the shots were coming from 3 men positioned along the ridge, using the rocks for cover. Taking a deep breath, she aimed carefully at the nearest raider and fired. The man jerked back with a cry of surprise and pain. June didn't wait to see if she'd hit him squarely. She fired again and again, forcing the raiders to duck behind cover. In the brief respite, she ran back toward Zach, heedless of the danger. "What are you doing?" he demanded as she reached him. "Get back to cover." "Not without you," June replied fiercely, helping him to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, his face pale with pain and blood loss. "Come on, just a little further." Together they staggered toward the boulders, Zach's weight nearly overwhelming June's smaller frame. Bullets continued to whistle around them, but the raiders' aim was thrown off by June's unexpected counterattack. By some miracle, they reached the safety of the rocks without further injury. June helped Zach sit, his back against a boulder, then quickly examined his wound. The bullet had torn through his thigh, leaving an ugly, bleeding gash. "It went clean through," she said, relief evident in her voice as she tore a strip from her petticoat to use as a bandage. "That's good." "You shouldn't have come back for me," Zach said, though his eyes betrayed his gratitude. "And you shouldn't have saved me from those raiders," June retorted, tying the makeshift bandage tightly around his leg. "Yet here we are." A bullet ricocheted off the boulder above their heads, showering them with stone fragments. The raiders were getting bolder, moving closer. "We can't stay here," Zach said grimly, checking the ammunition in his pistol. "They'll flank us soon." June peered around the edge of their shelter, assessing their situation. The horses had fled, taking their supplies with them. The path to town was blocked by the raiders. And Zach was in no condition to travel far on foot. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a narrow crevice in the rocky hillside about 100 yards away. "It might lead to a cave. If we can reach it, we'd have better protection." Zach followed her gaze, nodding slowly. "Good eye. But it's a long way to go with no cover." "We'll have to create some," June said, determination hardening her voice. She hefted the rifle. "I'll draw their fire, give you a chance to make it to the crevice." "Absolutely not," Zach replied immediately. "I'm not letting you risk yourself for me." "It's not open for debate," June said, surprised at her own firmness. "You can barely walk. I can run and shoot. It's simple mathematics." Before Zach could protest further, June raised the rifle and fired 3 rapid shots toward the ridge. As answering fire erupted, she darted from behind the boulder, zigzagging toward a fallen tree several yards away. The raiders' attention followed her, bullets kicking up dirt at her heels. From the corner of her eye, June saw Zach hobbling toward the crevice, using the distraction she'd created. Relief flooded through her as he disappeared into the narrow opening. Now she just had to reach him without getting herself killed. Taking a deep breath, June broke cover again, running in a low crouch toward the crevice. A bullet grazed her arm, tearing through the sleeve of her blouse. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but she kept moving, focused solely on reaching safety. The crevice loomed before her, dark and promising. With a final burst of speed, June threw herself into the narrow opening, landing hard on the stone floor of a small cave. Zach caught her, steadying her as she gasped for breath. "You're hit," he said, his voice tight with concern as he noticed the blood on her sleeve. "Just a scratch," June assured him, though the wound burned fiercely. "Are you all right?" "Better than I should be, thanks to you." Zach helped her deeper into the cave, away from the entrance where bullets occasionally ricocheted off the walls. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen." June managed a shaky smile. "Perhaps a bit of both." They settled against the cave wall, Zach's injured leg stretched out before him, June's bleeding arm cradled against her chest. Outside, the firing had ceased as the raiders realized their quarry had found shelter. "They'll wait us out," Zach said grimly. "Hope we either emerge or starve." June examined their shelter more carefully. The cave extended further back than she'd initially thought, disappearing into darkness. "Maybe there's another way out," she suggested. "Caves like this often have multiple entrances." "Worth investigating," Zach agreed. "But first, let me see that arm." June allowed him to examine her wound, wincing as he carefully rolled up her sleeve. The bullet had carved a shallow furrow along her upper arm, painful but not serious. "You were lucky," Zach said, tearing another strip from June's already tattered petticoat to bind the wound. His fingers were gentle despite their roughness, and June found herself focusing on his touch rather than the pain. "We both were," she replied softly. Their eyes met in the dim light filtering through the crevice. Something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of the bond that had formed through shared danger and mutual protection. For a breathless moment, June thought Zach might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, his hand still holding her arm. The moment was shattered by a voice calling from outside. "We know you're in there." It was the leader of the raiders, his tone smug with assured victory. "Might as well come out and talk terms. No sense in dying in a hole in the ground." Zach's expression hardened. He moved to the edge of the crevice, careful to stay out of sight. "What terms could you possibly offer that would interest us?" "Simple ones," the man called back. "The woman signs over her ranch to us. You both walk away alive. Seems fair to me." "And if we refuse?" Zach asked, though he clearly knew the answer. A cruel laugh echoed off the rocks. "Then we wait. Got plenty of water, plenty of ammunition. How long do you think you'll last in there, bleeding and thirsty?" June joined Zach at the crevice, anger overriding her fear. "Why do you want my land so badly?" she called out. "What's it to you?" There was a pause before the reply came. "Just following orders, madam. Our employer has plans for that valley that don't include small-time ranchers." "And who might your employer be?" Zach asked. Another pause. "Man named Blackstone. Owns the mining company up north. Wants to expand his operations." June and Zach exchanged glances. Martin Blackstone was well known throughout the territory, a wealthy businessman with political connections and a reputation for ruthlessness in his dealings. "Blackstone," June whispered. "My father worked for him before he bought our ranch, said he was a man who didn't take no for an answer." "Seems he hasn't changed," Zach replied grimly. He raised his voice again. "Tell Blackstone he can make a fair offer in town through proper channels. That's the only way he's getting that land." "Have it your way," the raider called back. "We've got all the time in the world." Silence fell, heavy with threat. June sank back against the cave wall, the reality of their situation settling over her like a physical weight. They were trapped, injured, without food or water. Even if they found another way out of the cave, they were miles from town with no horses. "We need a plan," she said, refusing to give in to despair. Zach nodded, his face resolute in the dim light. "First, we explore the cave, see if there's another exit. If there is, we might be able to circle around, take them by surprise." "And if there isn't?" June asked quietly. "Then we wait for nightfall," Zach replied. "Make our move when they're tired and less vigilant." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than surrender. Together, they began to explore the cave, moving carefully in the growing darkness. The passage narrowed at points, forcing them to proceed single file, with Zach limping doggedly despite his injury. June worried about his wound reopening, but knew better than to suggest he stay behind. The air grew cooler as they ventured deeper, with a hint of moisture that gave June hope. Water meant a possible source of life if they were trapped for long, and potentially an outlet to the outside world. After what seemed like hours of slow progress, they emerged into a larger chamber, where a thin shaft of light penetrated from above. Looking up, June could see a narrow opening in the ceiling, perhaps 20 feet overhead, too small and too high to be useful as an escape route, but enough to illuminate their surroundings. "Look," she said, pointing to the far side of the chamber. "There's another passage." Zach followed her gaze, nodding. "Let's check it out, but stay close, easy to get lost in cave systems like this." The new passage sloped gently upward, giving June hope that it might lead to the surface. As they moved forward, the air grew fresher, carrying scents of pine and earth rather than the stale, mineral smell of the deeper cave. "I think we're getting close to another exit," June whispered, excitement building within her. Zach squeezed her hand in acknowledgement, his grip warm and reassuring in the darkness. They continued forward, the passage gradually widening until suddenly they could see daylight ahead, a ragged opening partially concealed by brush. Approaching cautiously, Zach peered out. "We've come out on the other side of the hill," he reported. "Can't see the raiders from here, but they're likely still watching the main entrance." June joined him at the opening, blinking in the late afternoon sunlight. They had emerged on a steep slope covered with scrub pine and brush, with a clear view down to the valley below. In the distance, she could just make out the rooftops of the town they'd been trying to reach. "If we can make it down this slope without being seen, we might be able to reach town by morning," she said, hope rekindling. Zach nodded, though concern shadowed his features. "It's a long way to go on foot, especially with injuries, but it's our best chance." They waited until dusk began to fall before leaving the shelter of the cave. Moving as quietly as possible, they picked their way down the rocky slope, using the growing shadows for cover. Zach's limp was more pronounced now, his face tight with pain, but he refused to slow their pace. Night fell completely as they reached the valley floor, the darkness both a blessing and a challenge. Without moonlight to guide them, they had to move slowly, feeling their way forward and using the distant lights of the town as their beacon. Hours passed in grueling progress across the open country. June's arm throbbed, and exhaustion dragged at her limbs, but she pressed on, drawing strength from Zach's determined presence beside her. When he stumbled, she was there to support him. When her steps faltered, his quiet encouragement kept her moving. By the time the first pink streaks of dawn appeared on the horizon, the town was close enough that June could make out individual buildings. They had done it, survived the ambush, escaped the trap, and crossed miles of wilderness on foot, injured and without supplies. "We made it," she breathed, relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. Zach smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the attack. "Told you you were stronger than you knew." As they approached the outskirts of town, a rider appeared in the distance, heading in their direction. Zach immediately pushed June behind him, drawing his pistol despite his exhaustion. But as the rider drew closer, June realized it wasn't one of the raiders. The man wore a badge that caught the early morning light: the sheriff. "That's Sheriff Daniels," she said, relief flooding through her. "We're safe." The sheriff reined in his horse as he spotted them, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Good Lord," he exclaimed, dismounting quickly. "Miss Michaels, I heard your place was burned out, and Zimmerman, you look half dead, man." "Feel about the same," Zach replied dryly. "We've had a rough couple of days, Sheriff." Quickly, they explained what had happened: the raiders, the attack on Zach's ranch, the ambush in the hills. The sheriff's expression grew increasingly grave as they spoke. "Blackstone's men," he muttered when they finished. "Been suspecting he was behind the troubles in the valley but could never prove it. Seems he's getting bolder." "Will you help us?" June asked, swaying slightly with fatigue. The sheriff nodded firmly. "Damn right I will. First, let's get you both to Doc Wilson's place. Then I'll round up some deputies and head out to those hills." He helped Zach onto his horse. "Been wanting to put those raiders behind bars for months. Now I've got cause." The next few hours passed in a blur for June. The doctor cleaned and properly bandaged their wounds, declaring them lucky to have escaped with relatively minor injuries. The sheriff organized a posse to track down the raiders, armed with descriptions and the location of their ambush site. By evening, word arrived that 3 of the raiders had been captured. Their leader had escaped, but the sheriff assured June and Zach that it was only a matter of time before he was found. "What about Blackstone?" June asked, sitting beside Zach's bed in the doctor's small infirmary. "He's the real threat. Got a telegram from the territorial marshal," Sheriff Daniels replied. "Seems Blackstone's been under investigation for months. Your testimony might be just what they need to bring charges against him." Relief washed over June, though it was tempered by the knowledge that her home was still gone, her future still uncertain. She looked at Zach, who had been watching her with an unreadable expression. "What happens now?" she asked softly after the sheriff had left. Zach was silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving her face. "That depends on you, I suppose. What do you want, June?" The question caught her off guard. What did she want? Safety, certainly. A home. Purpose. But as she looked at the man before her, the stranger who had become so important to her in such a short time, June realized what she wanted most was not to lose him. "I want." She began, then faltered, uncertain how to express the feelings that had grown within her. "I don't want to run alone anymore." Understanding dawned in Zach's eyes. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "You don't have to." "What are you saying?" June asked, hardly daring to hope. "I'm saying that my ranch is too big for one person," Zach replied, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "And that I've grown rather accustomed to your company, Miss Michaels." June felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Zimmerman?" "If that's what you want," Zach said carefully. "Or I'm offering you a partnership, in all things if you're willing." The meaning behind his words was clear. June's heart seemed to skip a beat as she realized what he was proposing. Not just a place to stay, not just work, but a shared future, a life together. "I hardly know you," she whispered, though her fingers tightened around his. "You know the important parts," Zach countered. "You know I'll never let you face danger alone. You know I respect your strength and your spirit." His voice softened. "And I think you know how I've come to feel about you, June." The truth of his words resonated within her. In the crucible of danger and survival, they had indeed learned the measure of each other's character. June had seen Zach's courage, his integrity, his quiet strength. And somewhere along the way, between the terror and the triumph, she had fallen in love with him. Yes, she said simply. Yes to the partnership, to all of it. Joy transformed Zach's face, erasing the lines of pain and worry that had marked it since their ordeal began. He drew her closer, his free hand gently cupping her cheek. "Are you sure?" In answer, June leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, a gentle exploration, then deepened as Zach's arm encircled her waist, drawing her nearer. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly, eyes bright with emotion. "I'm sure," June whispered against his lips. "I've never been more certain of anything." 3 months later, June stood on the porch of Zach's ranch house, their ranch house now, watching as the last rays of sunset painted the valley in gold and crimson. The repairs to the barn were complete, the scattered herd gathered and increased by the addition of June's remaining cattle that had wandered back after the raid. In her hand, she held a letter that had arrived that morning from the territorial marshal's office. Martin Blackstone had been indicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit murder and land fraud. The valley was safe from his schemes, at least for now. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew June's attention. Zach was returning from the north pasture, his figure silhouetted against the evening sky. Her heart still skipped a beat at the sight of him, a reaction that showed no signs of diminishing with familiarity. As he dismounted and climbed the porch steps, June held up the letter. "Good news." "Blackstone's going to trial." Zach nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression as he removed his hat. "About time." He drew her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "How are the wedding preparations coming along?" "Nearly finished," June replied, settling against him comfortably. "Rachel sent a telegram. She and her husband will arrive next week for the ceremony." Their engagement had been brief by most standards, but neither had seen any reason to wait. They had already faced death together, had already proven their commitment to each other in ways that mattered more than any lengthy courtship. "Having second thoughts?" Zach asked, noting her pensive expression. June shook her head, smiling up at him. "Not a single one. Just thinking about how much has changed since that night I hid in your barn." "For the better, I hope," Zach said, his arms tightening around her slightly. "Infinitely better," June assured him, "though I could have done without being shot at quite so often." Zach laughed, the sound warming June from within. When they had first met, he had rarely smiled, let alone laughed. Now, joy seemed to come more easily to him, a transformation she treasured. "I was thinking," he said, his expression growing more serious. "After we're married, we might consider expanding the house, adding a few rooms." June raised an eyebrow, understanding his implication. "Planning for the future, Mr. Zimmerman." "Our future," Zach corrected, leaning down to kiss her softly. "A family, if you want that." "I do," June whispered against his lips. "Very much." As darkness fell around them, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans for a future that had once seemed impossible to June. From the ashes of destruction had come unexpected joy, a love forged in danger and nurtured in peace. They had both known what it meant to be alone, to face life's hardships without support or comfort. But as Zach had promised that night in the barn, neither of them would ever have to run alone again. Together, they had found not just safety, but belonging, a home built on more than timber and nails, a foundation stronger than any force that might stand against them. And in the years that followed, as their family grew, as the ranch prospered, as the territory transformed around them, they would face each challenge side by side, their love only deepening with time. For June and Zach had learned the most valuable lesson the frontier had to teach. That true strength lies not in standing alone, but in choosing to stand together, come what may.